Hello, I'm Doug Montgomery. I'm your primary instructor in the Design of Experiments MOOC, and I'd like to welcome you to the monthly Fireside Chat. And if you've been to some of these before, hopefully you've enjoyed them. I run this session every month with a guest speaker to try to explore some important topics and applications of experimental design. Um, I started doing this because I felt like we needed a live component in this long set of material. Um, we always have some time for Q&A when we get to the end of our guest speaker's presentation. So whether you're actually taking the Coursera courses, whether you're applying experimental design in your work, or simply curious about the topic and want to learn some more things, this is a great opportunity to ask questions and have a discussion. If you can't join us live, we always record these fireside chats and on our LinkedIn page, which is also connected to our YouTube channel, and we share the link in the meeting chat. If you're a participant in the Coursera course, then the recordings are available in the course under the Resources tab. Quick reminder, please continue to keep your microphones muted, your cameras off during the session to avoid any disturbances. Barking dogs and breaking wine glasses would be a serious problem. So let's don't do that. If you want to submit a question to either me or to our guest, please do this using the chat function on the Zoom menu. And you don't need to wait until the Q&A starts to start putting in your question. You can start putting that in anytime during during our whole fireside chat. And if your question doesn't get answered during this time period, we will respond to it in Coursera for those people that are actually enrolled. Our guest today is Mindy Hotchkiss, and she is an independent consultant operating as Enquery Research LLC. She was a technical specialist and enterprise-wide subject matter expert in statistics at Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is now an L3Harris Technologies company. She has over 25 years of experience as a statistical consultant between Pratt & Whitney and Aerojet Rocketdyne, supporting the engineering operations, manufacturing operations, technology development across the enterprise, including hypersonics and additive manufacturing, and where she spent many years facilitating complex multi-phase experiments in a wide variety of different physical and environmental settings. She has a BS degree in mathematics and statistics and an MBA from the University of Florida and a master's of statistics from North Carolina State. She is an ASQ CRE certified reliability engineer, certified quality engineer, a black belt, and a past chair of the ASQ Statistics Division. And she's got a really interesting topic that we're going to hear about today. And Mindy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today.
So, hi, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So let me share my screen. Let's see. So hopefully we're up and running now. So the topic we have today is design experiments for analytical wargaming. So this exploring agent-based simulation models with nonlinear dynamics. So this was a collaboration with a group of computer scientists. Essentially, Hamden is from Indiana University, Brennan and Lance Fiandella are from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Dr. Fiandella approached me about helping out with this project because it had a lot of factors they were not quite sure how to handle. So in this particular model, and they were interested, it was a topic of particular interest to them. So let me get started. So a little bit of background about this. Oops. This is an agent-based simulation model. Is a particular type of computer model that used for sort of complex exploration of analysis. So one of these was developed in 2022 by a group of public policy researchers at Harvard Kennedy School. So this is sort of spearled by a person named Erica Chenoweth, who's a really like the premier researcher in this area, very well known. I've snipped out a little bit of her biography there below from the Harvard research. She's written 9 books or, co-written. Right. There's one there that is fairly well known, which is the Why Civil Resistance uh, Works, and it's being covered up by my thing. Yeah, Why Civil Resistance Works. And this is a reference. I've got a few things in gray down at the bottom, so that's just if I've got a reference, I'll drop it down there. But so a little bit of background about why we're looking at this. So the U.S. National Defense Strategy emphasizes the great power competition, which is a change from in recent years from doing counterterrorism activity to more strategic competition with major powers. So China, Russia, so forth. So more Cold War style. Nonviolent action is a potentially effective form of soft power within gray zones to support information or influence operations. So in order to understand what's going on here, they're digging into understanding these factors that are leading to success or failure of these types of activities from both the red perspectives, and you hear that in a wargaming context, just that's the enemy or the adversary, or the blue perspective, which is the friendly forces. So this is, and then the simulating nonviolence can provide scientific analysis that supports more the real world operations here. Let me try to minimize this here. Let me go on to the next slide. So nonviolent action, of course, people familiar, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and I shouldn't have to introduce them. There's selected authors here about power and nonviolence, passion for peace. There's different, other publications. There's Chenoweth's Why Civil Resistance Works. The First Battle of the Next War. This is a document that was published in the by the Center for Civil, let me change this here, by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in January 2023, talking about the wargaming Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So there's activity out there looking into different things, wargaming communities, fairly active. So what exactly is wargaming? So I've got this kind of written out as sort of a more formal definition here, since I figured we're not less likely to be familiar with it. So the practice of investigating the impact of critical decisions and their potential ramifications in complex scenarios, especially in the context of conflict. This is wargaming. And for which there are temporal, spatial, and resource considerations. Usually there's a lot of limitations. You have a time machine, something has to move. You have limits in terms of where you can move, what you can do, how fast does it take. There's a lot of logistical details that need to be worked out. Usually there's representative graphical models or games. This is wargaming. There's actually physical tools a lot of times. There are human participants or players in most wargaming activities. So this, again, to add the element of realism to it, but this, of course, makes it very difficult to really study the effectiveness of decision-making processes here. And the purpose here is to both understand expand the understanding of the situation and inform policy and or operational decision-making. So people are making decisions based off the outcomes of things that they learn by exploring what they're doing here. There's this sort of the guru of wargaming is a guy named Peter Perla from the U.S. Naval Institute. There's a book he put out, or a document he put out in 1990 that walks through. You can actually buy. There's a recent publication they went through and reissued it. You can buy it on Amazon. So if you're interested in more about wargaming. It is used in other contexts. It does take different forms. This is something from a cybersecurity blog. I like it, very sort of shows the full range of like all the different types of war games that you can have and different advantages and disadvantages that you have associated with them. So for example, I mean, we're going to be talking about analytical models, which is very far to the right-hand side of this. But this is, so it does facilitate, it's very convenient, easy to, rerun different cases on a computer. But it's very abstract, how well does it represent the real world? But it's a lot cheaper than running major field exercises, or so forth. So there's, limitations, the further you go into the green zone, here you're more real, but you can't really study these in great detail, just in quite the same way. So there is a whole specialty of modeling and simulation that supports wargaming activities. So a little bit more about analytical wargaming. True wargaming involves humans and real-time decision making. If you talk to wargaming people, they're very adamant about that. Analytical wargaming is kind of a little bit of a support thing. It's not. It's more modeling and simulation efforts. So there's very little in Peter Perlow's book about analytical wargaming, actually. So, but what this does is it uses automation to support these modeling and simulation efforts and provide a more comprehensive view of the scenario under given assumptions. So you've got this kind of mock-up of scenario, you can do stuff. One approach is agent-based simulation models, which are a particular kind of computer simulation. I'll talk a little bit more about these in more detail. Here's another book here. Okay. So agent-based simulation model, you see it abbreviated differently, different places. So computational model, computer program that simulates the behavior of agents. So there's individuals walking around in your computer program for your behavior is being modeled in this program in a particular environment, and they're subject to different algorithmic rules of movement and behavior. So there's a mathematical expression for whatever, they're randomly distributed, they're, things get above or below certain thresholds, things happen. I'll show you how this works here. What this does effectively is creating a sandbox kind of environment for purposes of exploration in these scenarios where running the actual real world experiments is impractical or infeasible. It also allows the agents to interact with each other for whatever the protocols are. So you can write these at whatever level. So this is really, the model we're talking about today is really the first time somebody's tried to put together something like this for the nonviolence resistance perspective and to try to learn from that. So there's a reference on agent-based modeling. Okay, so here's a schematic of the model that we're going to be talking about. So there are 4 different types of agents. There's, you can see on the right, they're color-coded different things. I've got a map, a grid world I'll show you on the next page with a little video. You can see it walking through. But there's, so here we have 4 types. We have citizens and activists, police, and pillars. The color codes, they transition from states from active to inactive or back, they might start inactive, become active, and then deactivate again, depending on what's happening to them. So here, the citizens and the activists are parts of the resistance, and then the regime is the police and the pillars. And all these individual agents interact with each other independently based off the rules of what's happening to them at their specific location, what they can see, what they can't see, what's happening to them, what's the, their randomly generated conditions, for example. So there's levels of satisfaction and so forth with the society, peer pressure, and different things like that. So there's a lot of interactions and rules. So there's in terms of how they're moving around and their interactions with each other. They can go to jail. They can defect. There's a lot of they can be killed. So there's you can kind of see some of the items here. So there's a lot of complex interactions going on between these agents at a very, very granular level here that are subject to these nonlinear dynamics of these relationships. And these can result in really sudden changes in outcomes as you're sort of proceeding through the simulation. Now, and there's the link to this. The model itself here was originally put out in MATLAB by Chenoweth. That's that same link. The link below is redone. It's in Python out on GitHub. that was my collaborator's other student. All right, so here's a video. We have this is the grid world, and let me sort of explain what's going on here. This is a 40 by 40 grid. It's a toroidal grid, which means that the left side is the same as the right side, and the top is the same as the bottom. So there is an ability to cross across these, it's like a round world there. So they can interact with people close to them in whatever direction. So let me start playing this. So hopefully this is coming through. But you can see this one has a lot of police, the active police, the dark black triangles. The pillars are the pink stars. The blue are more, a lot of the citizens start out inactive and then become activists. There's not very many activists relative to the large. So this one is probably one that did not do very well because here we have all our activists and they're all inactivated. So this is probably a regime victory. So how does it end? So it ends when enough pillars defect. So that would mean the dark pinks pillars here have defected. They've joined the resistance essentially. And there's a certain percentage they need to get above, and then the resistance is jailed or killed. So that's another outright victory of the regime in charge. And then, or just all time steps pass. So how long are you running the simulation? So that's another thing we'll come back to. And that is considered a timeout with the regime still in power. So I can write this out and, statistical nomenclature here. We got all our different sample groups, nonviolence regime, the timeouts, probability of resistance victory. We can calculate these, probability of regime victory. Now, probability of timeout, the way the timeouts are kind of gives you a little pause from a statistics standpoint. How do we handle these exactly? What's the best way to do this? Because this is really a censored outcome. And it's not independent. So this is really, people say, oh, we can do censoring, but it's got to be non-informative censoring. This is definitely informative censoring. There's reasons why these particular certain things might be timeouts because it's in a state of stasis where it can't really progress. Like it may indefinitely say, no matter how much time you run, it may be very difficult to actually cause a particular scenario to go to an outright victory one way or the other. So there's other ways you could adjust for timeouts. You could take the denominator, subtract that off to get more of an adjusted percentage. So what we've done so far, like our focus has really been on this percentage of nonviolence victories just out of the total is sort of the simplest way to start off and sort of figure out what we're doing. This is just one minus that, of course, is the total primary, the regime victory. If we just include all timeouts, it's just assuming that the regime's still in charge. And so therefore, the regime still charged, it's still regime victory. So okay, so what's going on in the model? So there are 25 factors in the model. So that's a lot of factors. That's why we started, what can we do to try to figure out what's actually important here? What matters? So these are I've got them kind of grouped in different categories, sort of based off the different rules. So for example, max time steps up there at the top, max start delay, these are factors associated with the timing of the model. There's the agent distribution. So this is your kind of starting conditions. How are things allocated across the board? So citizens, activists, police, pillars, how much, and those have to, you've got a constraint there. Most people are going to be citizens, but you have, you got to total up to less than 100, right? You can't go over that. If I'm thinking about DOE ranges, what can I do? So I got some limitations there we got to work with. There's movement rules. How far can they see? Agents can see. This agent, we'll talk about in a minute here, is we wound up setting that one's going to be constant just to kind of keep some consistency across the whole thing. Activist is now how far can the activists see? How do they approach the pillars? This next section here is to do with, how do the police interact with the protesters? So how do they find them, target and kill them, with what percentages? How long do they go to jail? What's the legitimacy sort of the community? Um, how is the regime seen by the population generally? Peer pressure, fickle percentage. There's what's the threshold that's needed for the citizens to become protesters? So there's a lot of stuff in there. There's some protest specific parameters in terms of how long can protests last. And these were all random. These are kind of like max values that they'll be simulated from. It's not all absolute. Protest duration, protester threshold, how many people will protest immediately, and then defection down here at the bottom. What are the rules associated with that? Um, so this requires a lot of memory. So before I get into the actual data collection, so we did have had the resource. We were able to use the Indiana University's supercomputer, Big Red 200. So a little blurb about it. So this has a lot of memory, a lot of nodes, 264 carb. I'm not a computer scientist, but they were able to run a lot of cases very quickly once we got the system kind of set up and running, and sort of streamline the process. And also each individual case that we're running has got its individual ID here for everything that we run through it. So, but this was really enabled the whole project to be run effectively, because otherwise we would have had, there were a lot of concerns with, how long is it going to take to run the model? Because it does, each case running a model like this is is time consuming to run an individual case. So, get back to that in a minute here. But, okay, so here are the prior results that we had to work with. So this was from the previous study, the 10%, what the student had done initially. Once he had sort of redeveloped them all, got it all coded up in Python. They decided, well, let's kind of take a look and see what happens if we vary everything at like plus or minus 10%. Okay, so I'm looking at this after the fact. Of course, my little statistical, hair goes up on the back of my neck here. So this is a one factor at a time analysis. Of course, this is basically everything changing. You're leaving everything else at nominal levels and only changing one factor at a time for this 10% range. So this is what it found. Police percentage, peer pressure, backfire, coefficient, base legitimacy. But we don't really know any of this because of the way doing the one factor at a time. You can't really, so I threw cold water on that as well, there's probably a better approach here. We can't really judge the significance of the importance of these results due to the methodology. Okay, so one thing, computer design, natural, or a computer, working with a computer model, a natural thing that's, good a good option usually is doing Latin hypercubes. So these are space filling designs. So that's really what we wanted to see. Is like, let's get into the space and see what's going on. Like, how can we explore in order to see what factors are really contributing and where do you get the most leverage? How can you optimize this? There's a lot to kind of sort out here. So Latin hypercubes, if you're unfamiliar with them, are a type of optimal DOE used to sort of an extension of the traditional Latin square into sort of design hyperspace for K dimensions. Your intent here is to fill the design space in such a way that design is uniform and collapsed in any of the dimensions. And usually these are constructed to maximize the minimum distance between any 2 points in the sample set. As Anna said, is a key tool for computer experiments, running an experiment on a computer model due to the ability to control the inputs with full resolution. So this is really important. We have a computer program we're running on our computer model. Everything is automated. We can streamline this, and then I can input, any number of values there. And then also the deterministic. Now, most computer models that you hear and read about in the literature and the text references have a deterministic nature to them, and that eliminates the need for replication. So one little wrinkle here is that this is clearly not a deterministic model. This is a probabilistic or stochastic model. I was going to call it non-deterministic. My computer science people say that term I can't use there. It's reserved for something else. And so there's this is a standard reference for design analysis of computer experience. Page 1, introduction says it only applies to um, deterministic models. So, but let's see what we can do here. So there's some phases that we went through here. I think that this process kind of evolved as, or the DOE, what we were looking at kind of evolved as we learned more, worked through the process, sort of developed the streamlining and everything. So we started off some exploratory, worked with the predefined ranges, and then expanded the ranges, and there's a few different variations there. So let's talk about the exploratory assessments first. Um, so these were just kind of initial runs. The intent was just we got to get the model operational, understand the timing, constraints, other limitations, how much time does this really take, what are we really doing, set up the code for the automation, assess the model repeatability, which is a concern to me particularly. Um, so here's like baseline case repeatability. So the prior work had run 1,000 iterations or replications per case. In order to this is for the baseline case, and here you can see we ran this is like 15 of them. I think the range is like just below 50% to above 55. It was a bit high. I wasn't thrilled with that. Each one of these cases at the time is taking about an hour. This is before you're getting in the streamlining. Running 5,000 contracts, so these took about 2.5 hours. And that's better. 10,000 took twice the time. It wasn't, it actually had less, I mean, there's only 3 here, but the variability was reduced less than expected. So it was like not as much as we decided there was insufficient payback in order to run for that longer time. So we wound up sticking with 5,000 for the rest of the set of studies here. So everything you see, and these particular cases were run, this was the baseline case that was indexed on the previous page, and that includes 200 time steps. So that's another factor that does also affect the time. So fewer time steps, of course, takes less time. And there is, when you're dealing with these kind of models, there's some computational time. It's not just the model runtime, but there's some setup time in here involved in order to get everything sort of initiated and so on. And then once you run it and you get it set up, and then you have however many iterations you're going to do, you go through with the model, so the individual model runtime, which is going to vary. So that was one question. But so here the decision was to go forward with 5,000, which seems like a lot, but actually there's a lot of always here. Okay, so back to the factors. I'd mentioned there's one factor we kept constant. This was the agent vision radius. This is sort of more of a key. If you change this, then a lot of other stuff kind of changes. It has impacts on it. So well, that was kind of kept thing. Okay, so moving into the next phase. So the first Latin hypercube that we put together was really intending to kind of replicate that plus or minus 10% ranges that were being looked at in that first set of bar charts, that initial set of results. So we're trying to say, okay, what can we do here? Those results had been presented at ANSYN Annual Simulation Conference back in May. The reason they looked at plus or minus 10% is that they were thinking, like, just realistically, they could make small tweaks to things, might be more viable to translate in reality versus, all right, oh, we need to double something or triple something. How do you make an impact to that in a different, social, the social dynamics here. So it might be more plausible, more realistic to be able to do this kind of thing. They were also interested in looking at interactions, between the factors at that kind of level. So that was why we had those ranges, the plus or minus 10% ranges for this phase here. We also did added partial replication. So this was something I knew there was going to be some uncertainty associated with this. We were still kind of working through the streamlining process for the model. It was so we were trying to keep the numbers, 100, 150 something, but in terms of number of individual cases that we were running. But I wanted to include replicates. Actually, I think it was 200 we were trying to keep under altogether. So we included kind of uh, some points had no replicates, some points had 1, 2, 3, 4 replicates, as it turned out. Okay, so here are some of the results with respect to the case repeatability. So this kind of blew my mind. It was so their repeatability is all over the map here. So, which was very interesting. So, but you can see here we have so resistance percentage on the left-hand side. So these are different cases that happen to have replicates. There's some that have 2 here, some at 3, some that have 4. You can see some of these points are like right on top of each other. This one, I mean, they're 33% versus 33.04. That was like 2 cases different. And I have another one that's like 25% apart. So this is pretty wild. There were some clusters. It turned out we also had some dependencies in there due to the random seed and the timing of when the simulation was started, went off at the time, and so that's where we wound up with a couple clusters here. We had some repeats. So setting this up, there's a lot of potential. The scatter is huge in this model, so it's really important to make sure we're seeing something that's really present here. The noise floor is just enormous. So the simulation, which as you would expect, I mean, this is nonviolence. Resistance is not something that's very well understood. It's not like social dynamics are very difficult to model quantitatively. So anyway, this just reflects the inherent uncertainty in the model. We have to live with this. How are we going to handle it? This is going to cloud our ability to interpret effects. So this is visual I put together. This was actually more for that initial set of data here. So the ranges, you're just trying to see through the noise here. What is it that we've got? So the range is chosen for this investigation were considered to be thought to be inadequate to detect the effects since the major differences are not actually present in the data. So we do recognize that the nonviolence resistant success is a combination of many beneficial or factors permitting working together. But this range was totally inadequate to see anything. So next steps was going to be we got to widen the ranges and do more. So what you're seeing in this plot is I found this as like a handy trick to get a good visual for what is really going on. Can I see? So on the top here, so the top line here is my probability resistance victory, and it's all sorted by the probability. So green is best and red here is worst. So 1 and 0 or whatever the values were. And then this one, the red one here is the opposite. That's the regime victory. So it goes red to green. Now, and then I have all the inputs. So the 22 inputs that we were looking at were for all the different cases that we ran. So this was 160, 70, 80 cases there. And it had, so these are all color coded by the different values for each value. Now, what you would expect to see here is if something is actually contributing here, you would expect to see more green on the left side. That's lining up with my response versus and there's nothing here. It's very it's all over the map. So here's there's one I've got kind of called out here. This was the activist percentage. Okay, that would make sense if you had more activists in your population. You should have a higher probability of victory potentially. That could certainly be associated, but this was the only thing that showed up as potentially a candidate, but it's still very, very noisy. It doesn't really So now, one thing I do want to say is when you run this through, I take all this data, I drop it in a binomial regression model. Because I have 5,000 in each case, everything is like massively significant. Significance here does not mean anything. So it does not provide any predictive capability whatsoever. So we had to come up with an alternative way to kind of look at things here that is not going to just drown in the noise. So all right, the next stage here, so we expanded the ranges, added more factors, and now we have full 5x replication, heavy replication across the whole thing. So we add all the factors involved. We just kind of threw everything in the pot. We'll see what we get. Expand the full ranges. So except for this one agent vision radius. And we added a lot of replication to try to do what we could. So now this went the other way. So we wound up with the new expanded matrix resulted in only a few successes. So essentially what happened is we moved too far out. We changed we changed some factors, but now we're in a non-viable region of the design space. That is far, we had a lot of data that were just zero. It was, but what this tells us, there are certainly influential factors. There's some stuff here that's very important. That's changing it. And we changed, all right, we need to kind of figure out what this is. So we kind of worked through the data, working through the model logic. There are two factors that we identified that have really amplifying effects here. One is structural, more to the model. The other is, has some ability to play with it more. But so these are the protester threshold and the wind defect threshold. So the protester threshold is the minimum number of people needed to be together prior to a protest starting. So the baseline here was 1. So that was what was in all the cases that we ran. So now 1 is actually the minimum possible. The max was 14. So when we open this one up, so when we did plus or minus 10%, this doesn't change at all. But right, because plus or minus 10% on 1, it goes to 0.9 to 1.1, right? So that doesn't actually do anything. So but you increase I'll show some results later, but if you go really what happens on this, if you go above 3 to 5, like you're kind of limiting your ability to do anything for the resistance at all. It's very, very limiting. The other thing that's happening is the wind defect threshold. So this is the threshold needed for the victory to be achieved in terms of the number of pillars defected. So the percent converted to the resistance. So this, when we allowed this to change, this had a baseline value of 10%. And it had been held constant previously. When we extended it, we ranged it from 1 to 80. But what happens when we move this or we allow this one to vary, is that this changes the goalpost. It's like moving the goalpost on the football field farther away. So it makes it very difficult for the goal to be achievable. So we backed that down just for consistency. We said, okay, let's just go with a baseline. There was literature, that's what's in the conventional, we're not subject matter experts in this area. Like I said, this is more computer science with an interest in this topic. And so we went with, here's what the subject, the people with the subject matter expertise recommended, or thought was a plausible value. So how do we handle this? These operational, we call them model operational viability constraints, I guess. So that's our agent vision radius, the constant value. So here's our protester threshold is down here as 1. We started off with 14, backed that one down. We had a trial, the pilot ran it at 8. We wound up limiting it, and then they ran it again, so reduced it even further to 5 to kind of bring ourselves into this region where we could get more visibility into where the resistance has got some chance of success. So, and then like I said, the wind defect percentage, we varied this initially, then backed it down to 10, reverted to baseline. Okay. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about here, which is that's maximum time, which is also kind of a structural model factor because it's something that like it shouldn't matter, right? How long you run the simulation should not matter. It's how long does it take to converge? How long does it take? At what point do you need to, eliminate timeouts? There is a potential, right? You're interpreting these, 100, 200, 300, however, maybe this, you could interpret this as right? We're interested in looking in a short-term scenario versus a longer-term scenario, but it's, there are cases where you keep running it and you kind of terminate, uh, you plateau into a certain region and you're just not going to get there's some things that will just always time out regardless, so just depending on what the scenario. So this is something that we were concerned about, like how much does this matter with respect to the other conclusions that we're getting. So in terms of more like a model of robustness standpoint to look at. Okay. Um, so here's what we're doing here. This is the last phase that we ran. This data set came through in August, actually, I think. Um, so we reduced adjusted the ranges, reduced the sampling, the non-viable regions, and we still have heavy replication. We were going to reduce the replication. We wound up still with 5 just because once you run cases, there's valid cases, so we wanted to include them. So we wound up with an extra set for some reason. So due to some issues with getting the runs set, we wound up with an extra one. So, so here's a summary of here's all as we walk through the different steps, the different phases, and sort of what we wound up with in terms of observations. I was initially, sort of, there's a rule of thumb out there for how many do you use. It's a function of the factors. So I was using 7 initially, 7 times my number of factors, whatever, with giving my number of cases. I stopped kind of playing with that. We just said, let's go with 10 for the last phase, just for simplicity, because it really was like they're turning around. The optimal number of cases stopped really being an issue just because she could turn around results in like 3 days. So it was all, we could get 1,000 data points. So it was fine. It wasn't a huge issue. Anyway, so all data runs were considered valid. We could aggregate them. We had some supplementary data since extra sets were run over the initial plan, but there's no need to discard them. They're not bad data. They're just extra data. And now one thing to note is that the inclusion of the baseline data and the first LHD one, the plus or minus 10% data, if we include those, they actually do really bias the results. Since this turned out to be like a tiny percentage of the actual design space, like it is not even calculable in Excel in terms of volume. It is a tiny, tiny, tiny region. So we have a ton of data on this one tiny region that is actually not really representative of the bulk of the space. So, and we have what, 266 observations from there, right? It's so we left those out and used consolidated the second one with the third and the pilot data as reasonably representative of the space of interest and allowing us to pull out that range as much as you can. So, so here's the data analysis process. So first we transform the binary outcomes data to linear scale so that we can just use conventional methods. Use a logit transformation. It's the next slide. Aggregate the analysis of everything through everything. What are the key drivers? So when I say all data, in that case, I mean the all max time steps values. So the 100, 200, and 300s, everything together there. Now, one note is that everything is going to have inflated significance values here. There's a lot of points, but our priority here is to identify what's most impactful. We're not really trying to construct an overfitted model. Everything winds up being significant. You wind up with 15. So I could fit it, I could get a gazillion factors thrown in there as significant, but they're not really important necessarily. So the magnitude of the effects relative to the noise is harder to tease out. So we're in the process of doing more with that. Anyway, so then we're separating out the data by the max time steps, so 200, 300, 100, 200, 300, and looking at the consistency relative to the eye results. So this is kind of like maybe a blocking factor, trying to see if this is causing noise. Do I get extra? Because it is, it does show up as kind of moderately significant, but how does it what is it really doing here? And then this is also where how you treat the response if you were to change to include the timeout somehow. That's or a trimodal response that would also give you different options. This is a linearization approach here. The equation for the logit, right? Just log p1 minus p changes everything. So this guy allowed me to get the data on the right scale without allowing those raw data counts to overwhelm all the numbers. So it's a lot easier to work with. And then we can just use standard stat packages to do whatever. There were some adjustments you do have to make sure, you have to be a little careful, make sure you're not undefined. So if like we didn't have any cases where the denominator was undefined, but where the logit was undefined, we added a half case there just to get something on the board. Okay, so these are the aggregate results for everything. That full data set here is 1,300 points. The data set contains more noise, limited predictive capability. So top three factors: protester threshold, activist move strategy. Police was fourth here. I know I'm running low on time here. The max, this was 100 protester thresholds. We had, again, you're only getting, even with all these, about 50% adjusted R squared, but these are the same top three factors. Top three factors here again, and again, police shows up as 4, similar results here. Now here I have a different fourth factor, but now this is basically the factors, which I talked through this already, factors with structural importance in the model. Wind defect threshold, max time steps is a contributor. I have the rest of the data has some plots. This is one way to look at a visual, kind of analogous to a main effects plot. So here's 100, 200, 300, just so you can see the timeouts dropping. The actual percentage is decreasing a little bit too, but why that is probably due to more interactive factors. This is some of the activists, the protester results. This top chart here is the activist. As you look at the range from 0 to 1, you can see both improved results. And here's the green boxes as the resistance victory. Same thing here, activist move strategy. You can see the thing I'm going to jump ahead to. Here's protester threshold, right? It does best with just 1, diminishes fairly quickly. This is a chart with all the factors together, looking at an interactive of those 3, not the time steps. This is averaging using all the time data, but it's you can see this bottom corner is the protester threshold, and then as you go from the activist move strategies across the top. So here's the random one, and the gray data is mostly regime victory. So you can see how there's definitely very impactful differences. And then here, as you're increasing your activist threshold or your activist percentage, if you don't have many activists, you don't have much happening. And then you do have a lot of activists, there's a lot more potential for success. So contributions, we applied the space filling design. I did this, identified new factors, future work. There's a lot of potential future work on this. It's kind of work in progress. We got a paper in progress. Hopefully it'll get published soon. One comment, we are trying to digest the results in terms of what are practical implications. So the regime's always going to have the advantage here. So identifying what factors or factor combinations have the greatest leverage would really provide the greatest impact here. That's a slide about this modeling conference. This is Moore's. I just want to throw this out before I last slide here. As if you're interested in work of this is the Military Operations Research Society. It's a big organization. It's got a lot of different, what they call communities of practice, 26 communities of practice, 35 working groups. They have a couple different publications. Their annual symposium, they have 35. They have a parallel session for every working group. So it's 35 parallel sessions. So it's quite wild. We presented the initial work on this to, you submit it individually to each working group. So we had it at the computational social science and the wargaming ones at the last symposium, which was in June. So, and that's my references. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. A lot of material here.
I was sorry, I was thinking I was going to get close to 20, close to 40 minutes there, but
Yeah, well, it's really kind of a fascinating topic because to me it's a novel kind of computer experiment because it deals with how people interact.
mhm.
And a lot of computer experiments are more uh, let's call it physics based. Okay, where you
Yeah.
have where you have uh, in some cases deterministic relationships. Uh, and of course, there are alternatives. I mean, people use computer models for doing things like production scheduling, and there you've got random components that something closer to what you've got, but you're actually trying to model human behavior, which I think it's kind of fascinating. That's to me quite interesting. I do have one question about sponsorship. Is the DoD funding this work?
Um, this is something that was kind of developed offline. I'm not quite sure exactly. There was a student who was funded to redo the model, but I'm not
Okay.
quite sure what the source of their funding was for that. So
I was
they
just
said,
wondering what
yeah,
agencies within the DoD uh,
yeah,
would.
there was a lot of interest in it at the Moores conference, certainly. So.
Yeah, I can imagine that this would be something that either DoD or maybe Homeland Security would have some interest in.
Mhm.
Uh, we had for many years here a Homeland Security research center. In fact, my office is actually located in their facility
Mhm.
for some strange reason. But basically, all of those Homeland Security research centers were closed about a year ago, and
Yeah.
and I don't know what sort of research the Homeland Security. Anyway, I'm just curious about where the
Yeah.
funding
Uh,
for
Yeah.
this would come from.
Yeah. I know that there had been some funded work that had been done. It was like it was canceled because of COVID. Actually, they had some. I mean, again, a lot of this kind of stuff is being done behind the wall. So and they're not publishing
Yeah,
general results, but there was a summary where, okay, we were trying to pursue models of this type and unable to do it because of the classified nature. So that's why Dr. Fandel, he had a personal interest in this particular topic, and
okay.
he funded his grad student to he needed a master's project, I think, and to replicate the model, and that's how they constructed it and they got it working in Python. That's the one that it's out on GitHub now, and they have in order to kind of give them something that they could play with that was not sort of behind the screen there, and that was
Yeah,
accessible.
okay.
So and it is like I said, it's a the researcher there, Erica Chenoweth is she's the premier person I think in this area, for her to be um the model that was developed there. This is really kind of the first approach going down this path. So yeah.
It'd be interesting to check with her and see where some of this work was initially funded because it's really interesting stuff.
Hmm.
And I think your idea of using the Latin hypercube design for this was a good. I think that was a good strategy. Uh, something else that people might consider as an alternative to that are the fast, flexible filling designs
Hmm.
that are currently in JUMP. They fill the space a little bit differently, but they still are quite quite useful.
Yeah, similar kind of algorithm intent there. I think the thing that we struggled with, I think as any project, you get in here and it's okay, which factors do you include? How far, where do you set the limits? What is really plausible? And that was, starting from, um, the initial step there. Okay, let's just do, baby steps here. Let's just start small and work with the 10%. But really that, once we got into it, is that really proved like it was, yeah, definitely insufficient. So it was, yeah, it was really kind of remarkable to see, and then once we had everything come together,
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
yeah, you can, so there's definitely more work to be done here, but it's, I mean, there's a lot of different directions you could go with it. I think they're going to try, I think, um, Dr. Fandel's got another student working on this now with, trying to do some optimization kind of methods. They'd like to do something with, uh, trying to incorporate more things in the model itself that, what are the nature of the interactions or
Right.
something. But there's a lot of, I mean, one thing I didn't really talk about, I mean, that was like the actual data reduction for any individual run, you really
Hmm.
lose a ton of information. Like we could only save, like we got to program what we could, there's certain things, but you're getting summary measures of the, just okay, success, failure, or timeout, but there's an enormous amount of things that are happening in that 2.5 hours that you're running each
Right.
model, each case there, or whatever it wound up being with, where, so where it would become more clear if you're able to watch it, you know, so see what was happening.
Yeah, computer experiments that run a long time are really kind of a problem. My doctoral dissertation program ran about 3 hours
Hmm.
on it. This is, of course, this was an IBM 7040, is back in the dark days of computing.
Yeah.
We have one question that has come in, but before I get to the question, I want to say one thing to the MOOC participants. Uh, there is material in the MOOC on computer experiments. And so there is some lecture material, there's some course material, and there's some reading material in the textbook on computer experiments. We talk about computer experiments with deterministic outcomes and computer experiments with random outcomes. And so, there is material if you want to learn more about this general area. There's definitely um, uh, places you can go in the MOOC. Okay,
Yeah.
questions. Okay, we got one here that says, how far are we from predictive modeling with AI? And I don't know that I know enough about AI to be able to answer that question, but it's an interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Um, Actually, I think there is no answer to that because
Yeah,
every problem is different.
that's where I'm sort of where I'm headed, right? I don't think we know enough to be able to answer that question.
I think it's an unanswerable question. The current methodology of AI is very application specific. So in terms of doing these kind of things,
Yeah,
you need to have a tool that's constructed specific to your applicate, whatever your thing is, and it's not going to be, unless you set it up to be a particular way, it's not going to be extrapolatable. So you have to be very, very, very careful with how you do that.
yeah, I think so. Here's a couple of comments that came in. Uh, you showed linear model effects. Jump predictor screening is also useful for understanding drive and inputs based on random forest. I don't know. What are
Yeah,
your
I've,
thoughts?
I've played a lot with stuff. I just did the stepwise regression there as a
Yeah,
simple thing. Yeah. It just again just trying to like, okay, there's so many different ways we could address this. How can we kind of consolidate the paper that we're working on? It kind of just kind of shows, right, let's look at the impact of the steps and
right.
well, let's see if are the conclusions consistent across the different lengths of the model
Yeah,
um as a kind of as a starting point before getting into a lot of details because I did run a lot of other stuff too as well.
right.
Yeah.
And then the second comment was you might also look at VVUQ methods. Um,
Hmm.
this is
Oh,
there's an ASME reference here, ASME VVUQ for investigating model validation and impact of numerical errors of convergence that you mentioned. Uh,
yeah. Um, I don't think these are numerical errors of convergence. This is just the state of like the system itself is stable. Like the computational, the stuff that's going on under the hood, like all that stuff is converging just fine. It's the model itself, the agent-based simulation model, where it just happens to wind up where there's cases that do not resolve, or just because the scenario, winds up is unique.
yeah.
So yeah, but I can
Okay.
look up that. I did want to add one quick comment. Like I have done, there are other probabilistic models, particularly risk models. If you're looking at risk, that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing where I used to do a lot of risk simulations, and there were probabilistic stochastic models, right, with uncertainty and trying to, look at stuff like that. So this is certainly an application that is out there in industry, where you would
Right.
have these kind of problems as opposed to just the like the physics-based models that are used in like design and aerothermal kind of modeling and so on, physics-based modeling.
Right.
So
Well, that's the end of questions and comments. Uh, this is the end of today's session. Mindy, thank you so much for spending time with us. Our next fireside chat is going to be on November 29, and there'll be more information about that posted in LinkedIn. And you can find, of course, the past recordings in the resources tab in Coursera. And if you're not in Coursera, you can always go to our LinkedIn's our YouTube site and find them there. I think we have something like 42 or 43 fireside chats recorded now. So there's a lot of really useful, exciting stuff out there. And we hope you come back. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.